Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on what time you're watching this video, or simply good hello. I am determined to make good hello a thing. So, this is going to be a video on our data collection project assignment. This assignment is a major portion, our major portion of our course. Although it's not our signature assessment for the course, which is our functional behavior assessment and behavior intervention plan, it is a huge piece. As our course function is focused on applied behavior analysis, one of the key points or key components is being able to observe student behavior, collect data on that behavior, and then respond to that data that we've collected. So this assignment is going to help you to be able to look at being able to collect data 4 different ways on student behavior. So I've started our video with looking at our iLearn content page. I've got mine set in student preview. So hopefully mine looks like what you see when you log on. So I'm on the content page. And you've probably noticed by now that I'm just a little bit OCD. So things are color coded for our major assignments. The classroom management IRIS modules, parts 1 and 2 were purple. The information for the classroom management plan was in blue. Reinforcer survey, all of that information was in pink. The data collection is in red, and then the functional behavior is in orange, just so that way it makes it easier to be able to connect the things that go together. So I have a PowerPoint for you, so I'm not going to navigate through here. I've already got the information saved for us on a PowerPoint, and hopefully I've got everything in there correct. I guess we'll soon find out. So I haven't yet figured out how to display my PowerPoint in full screen along with the photo of me presenting. So that's why, much like I ask you to do for your getting acquainted video, as well as for your FBA video project presentation, that's why I have my screen split. So that way you can still see me present. At the same time, you can see the information that I'm discussing. So let's get started talking about our data collection project. So as I said, one of the key components of our course is being able to observe student behavior and then being able to collect that data, analyze that data, and do something in response based on that data that we collect. So we are going to be looking at 4 different types of recording: duration, event, latency, and then partial interval or whole interval or momentary time sampling. They all kind of go together. And I'll explain that here in just a moment. So for your project, I've provided for you a template that you'll be using to try to simplify things. Instead of writing a formal paper, you'll be completing a template. And the template is arranged so that it has the first page as an example, and then there's a page for duration, a page for event, a page for latency, and then a page for interval recording. And so you'll be filling that in. You'll start with duration, and you'll choose a student whose behavior lasts a long time. So, like, say, for example, a student who has a temper tantrum that lasts 30 minutes, a student who's sleeping in class for over 25 minutes, something that lasts a long amount of time, not just simply a calling out one time or an out of the seat, something that lasts a long period of time. You're going to collect that data, enter that data into Excel, use Excel to create a graph. You're going to write a description of who and what you observed, in other words, what was going on, who the student is, tell me a little bit about the student, not their legal name, full first and last, because of confidentiality, but tell me about the kiddo, tell me about the situation in the classroom, what's going on, what was happening during the time that the behavior was occurring, what was the student supposed to be doing instead of what they were actually doing. I also need you to explain to me why the type of collection that you're using is appropriate for that behavior. So, for example, if I'm observing Charlie Brown having a temper tantrum in class, and that temper tantrum lasts 35 minutes, it is much more significant to know that he had a tantrum for 35 minutes than to simply know frequency or event, one tantrum. One. I counted one. So, what's more important, to know that he had a tantrum, or to know that he had a tantrum and sustained that tantrum for 35 full minutes? That's more significant. That's why duration recording would be appropriate for behaviors such as having a tantrum, or sleeping in class, or elopement when the student went missing for a while or took off, or whatever the case might be. You're going to analyze and discuss the data, include any insight that you may have regarding the behavior. And then one of the key things is looking at the function of behavior. So we will be talking about all of these recording types in length in Chapter 4, and we'll be talking about function of behavior in depth in Chapter 7 of our text. So you go through that process for duration recording. You're going to repeat the same process for event, for latency, and then for interval. So for event recording, it's simply a tally mark. So you're looking for how many times, you're looking for a behavior that has a distinct beginning and end, but not something that lasts for a long period of time. It could be getting out of the seat. It could be calling out. It could be how many times the student raises their hand, how many times the student puts their head down, how many times the student daydreams, how many times the student says something inappropriate. So it's just a behavior that doesn't last a long time, but that you can easily count because it has a clear beginning and an end. For latency, you're looking for someone who, that when you give them a request, they don't immediately respond or they don't immediately initiate that behavior, that you have to wait for them to then initiate the behavior. It could be a matter of you've asked students to come into class as you greeted them at the door and you asked them to begin their morning assignment. And everyone but Charlie Brown is beginning their morning assignment. Charlie Brown's still wandering around in circles, or Charlie Brown's still unpacking his backpack. Charlie Brown's daydreaming out the window. Charlie Brown's on his laptop playing a game, watching YouTube videos on TikTok, or whatever the case might be. So it's that time between the request and the time the behavior is initiated. Interval recording, you might choose something that's hard to count, such as a student hand flapping or twisting their hair, or eye twitching, or chewing on their shirt, or something that that would be difficult to count, and not necessarily because of a duration of time, but either because it happens too quickly or just that it's difficult to count. Tapping pencils, making noises, something of that nature. And I'll explain what interval recording is here in just a moment. You're also going to upload for me your Excel spreadsheet that's going to contain the raw data for each of those 4 types of recording. Your graphs that you complete through Excel need to be embedded in the template that you submit, not uploaded as separate files. Embedded in the template, please. So your template is arranged in this format. It is, the very first page provides for you an example page. So it's broken up into 4 quadrants for each of the 4 types of collection. So you'll have a page like this for each one of the 4 types. So let me go into each one of the 4 sections in detail. So this first page just says data collection method example. The next one would say duration. The next one would say latency, then event, then interval recording. So that way they're labeled for you. So the first section that you're going to do for each of the 4 types of recording is a description. Like I mentioned before, please, for confidentiality purposes, do not give me the child's legal first and last name. I often pick on Charlie Brown. I talk about Charlie Brown. That song, Why Is Everybody Always Picking on Me? So I use Charlie Brown. You can give me either the child's legal first name or their last name or the initials or a fictitious name. Tell me about the child. How old is the child? What grade are they in? What's their ethnicity? Do you know if they have a 504 plan or an IEP? Do you know if they have a history of behavior issues, emotional issues, academic struggles? What do you know about the child? Tell me what you know about the child. Tell me about the behavior, and don't just simply say, well, he has an attitude problem, or he misbehaves, or he's disruptive. Be specific. Jay engages in disruptive classroom behaviors during large group settings, particularly during shared reading and writing by making loud noises, short yell-outs, animal sounds, etc., interrupting student focus and learning. That tells me what's going on. If you just simply say he's disruptive, how is he disruptive? What is he doing? I need it to be specific. And then you're going to explain to me why duration recording is appropriate. So the example I gave you earlier of the student, say, for example, that is having a temper tantrum. A temper tantrum would be appropriate because what's important for this to know about the behavior is how long the behavior lasts, not the frequency or how many times, but the length of time that the behavior lasts. That's why it's important. The second section would be your graph. And I gave you here an example and a non-example. You do not need to provide for me non-example. Please don't provide a non-example. I did this just for your reference. So I don't simply want a chart. You're already uploading your Excel for me. I can see that. I need to see that you can take that information and turn it into a graph. So I need you to provide for me a graph, not just a chart. And like I said, you're going to create it in Excel, copy and paste it into the template. It needs to be embedded in the template that you upload. The next section on the lower left-hand side is the data analysis and insight. So the discussion of the data you collected. Tell me about the During a 60-minute observation, David had 3 tantrums that lasted 3 minutes, 7 minutes, and then 5 minutes, with a total duration of 15 minutes. Or tell me about the percent that it was 25% of the observation. Tell me about the average duration that he had 3 tantrums for a total of 15 minutes, which meant it was an average of 55 minutes per tantrum. Tell me about the data. Discuss the data with me. And then tell me about the observation. What was happening when the behavior occurred? Did something appear to trigger the behavior? So did something occur before Charlie Brown did XYZ? How did the others in the room, both the adults and the students, and the other peers, how did they respond to the students' behavior? And did you notice whether or not their response impacted Charlie Brown's behavior, impacted the student that you're observing, whether positively or negatively? Did you see a connection between, or did you see a response from that student based on how the others in the room responded? Lastly, the function of behavior. Like I said, we'll talk about this in depth in chapter 7, but the key point to understand is that we behave the way we do for a reason. Our behavior serves a function. Again, I'm going to point out that we are looking through the singular lens of ABA. There are other schools of thought out there that would say that there are other functions of behavior, say, for example, control or power. We're going to focus on ABA, applied behavior analysis, and we're going to say that we're looking at the function of behavior either as a purpose to gain or either to escape or avoid. So are we looking to gain attention? Are we looking to gain a tangible or an event? Are we looking to gain sensory stimulation? Or, flip side of the coin, am I looking to escape or avoid attention? Am I looking to escape or avoid an event or a task? Am I looking to escape or avoid sensory or internal stimulation? So some people might look and say, well, Charlie Brown has ADHD, so ADHD is the function of his behavior. No, ADHD might be a contributing factor to the behavior, and most likely it is. So I have attention deficit. I don't have the H, but I have attention deficit disorder. Well, I believe I do. Never been formally diagnosed, but I'm confident that I do. So my interrupting others, my constant talking, my struggle with being able to focus and being able to maintain attention on one topic before I jump to other things, or starting this thing and then starting this thing and then starting this thing and starting this thing, are all contributed to my attention deficit disorder. It's not a function of it. I'm not trying to gain that distraction. I'm not trying to gain that lack of focus. It's something I have, but it's not something I'm attempting to gain. So my behavior of interrupting others isn't because of my ADD. My interrupting might be because I'm trying to gain attention. It might be because I'm trying to gain sensory stimulation because I can't stay focused on this one thing long enough. I can't wait, that impulsivity. And so I've got to do something with that impulsivity, or with the need for being able to jump from one thing to the other, and then not the inability to be able to maintain my focus on one thing. So my attention deficit disorder, or ADHD, or ADD, or autism, or Fragile X syndrome, or fetal alcohol syndrome, or intellectual disability, those all might be contributing factors to my behavior. But am I looking to gain attention? Am I looking to avoid or escape attention? Am I looking to gain an object or an event? Am I looking to avoid an event or a task? Am I looking to avoid sensory or internal stimulation or discomfort? Am I looking to gain sensory stimulation? That's what we're talking about when we talk about the function of behavior. So for each section of our data collection project, for each of the 4 collection purposes, each collection part is worth, we've got 15 and then 10, so that's 25, plus 10 is 35, plus 5 is 40, right? Yes, 40 points. So you're probably thinking, well, 40 points, you said the assignment is worth 200. Yes, so there are points that you will also get for writing expectations, for uploading your raw data, and then also points for your conclusion at the end. And I'll go over that in a second. So this page is what you will see. Like I said, this example page is there for you. Give me just 1 second. My battery's about to die. Oh my goodness. All right, sorry about that. I did not want to have to start this video again because this is already the third time that I've started the video. So I apologize. I'm out of breath now. But I literally ran downstairs to grab my cord, to run back upstairs to plug in the cord. So babysitting the grandbabies while I'm trying to make this video too, which hence is the reason why this is the third take. I definitely didn't want a fourth take, you guys. Out of breath. Got my steps in, but out of breath. All right, so as I was saying before I had to run for the cord, each section out of your 4 is worth, like I said, 40 points. And then you will also have points for, like I said, writing expectations, uploading your Excel data sheet, and then also for the conclusion that we're going to talk about now. I had to get back on it. So those are the sections that we just went over. The last section, the last page of your template is a conclusion reflection. With every assignment that we do, I hope that you're learning something from it. I hope that it's meaningful. I don't believe in busy work. I hated busy work. So I don't believe in that. So my hope and my desire and my intent is that every assignment that I have you do, that you gain something from it. So what I'm looking for here is for you to tell me what you learned from the assignment and how can it or will it impact your future practice. So in other words, how will you be able to use it in your classroom settings? How will you be able to use it moving forward? What did you learn that you didn't know? Or what did it reinforce that you already knew, if you were already aware? So that's the last section of our template. So let's talk about those 4 different types of recording. Like I said, we go into detail about these in chapter 4 in our text, but I'm going to go ahead and give you a brief description of each one now. Duration. Think of a marathon. So duration is the length of time. You're looking for something that takes a long time. The length of time that a behavior lasts. It is a measure of time. So, for example, how long Charlie Brown had a temper tantrum. How long Charlie Brown was sleeping in class. If you're working with a child in life skills on toileting issues, how much time they're spending in the bathroom on their own toileting, taking care of their own toileting issues. If you have a child who is consistently off task, how long are they spending time off task? If you're looking on the positive side, how long are they spending on task? So it's a measure of time. And so you would literally start your clock at when the behavior begins and stop your clock when the behavior ends. Literally it's just a measure of time. The behavior lasted for this time. And it could be things that happen multiple times. Like the example I gave you at the beginning, where the child had 3 tantrums, 5 minutes, 7 minutes, whatever the case was. And so you're looking at each one. The child was off task for 5 minutes and then was off task for 7 minutes and then off task for 3 minutes. So you could be looking at more than one occurrence, but how long did each one of those occurrences last? Or it could be a matter of the child had a temper tantrum for 40 minutes out of a 45-minute class period. So it was one occurrence and it lasted 45 minutes. So you're looking at a behavior that takes a long amount of time. Event recording. Event recording is the simplest. It's a tally mark. It is, you are taking account of how many times the behavior occurs. So you're not looking at how long, you're looking at how many, how frequent does the behavior occur. So it's literally, you could be looking at how many times Charlie Brown calls out, right? So Charlie Brown called out without raising his hand, tally mark. Called out again, tally mark. Called out again, tally mark. One thing I would tell you is that every time you take out your piece of paper and you start noting, and the students can see that you're noting information about them, their behavior, because of reactivity, is likely to change. So if you can come up with a way to collect data without them knowing it, that would be great. I love event recording because it works for me. So I often collected data on Wednesdays because it's the middle of the week and that's how my brain functions. And so on my data collection days, I'd make sure that I wore something with pockets. And as you've noticed, I'm always moving my hands when I'm talking. So it did not, or at least it didn't seem that the students even noticed that I was doing anything different. So on Wednesdays, I'd wear something with pockets, and in my right pocket, I have a collection of either like paper clips, pennies, dry beans, anything but chocolate because it melts and I eat it. So things like that wouldn't work. Gummy bears because they stick together. But things like counting chips, manipulatives, those little counting bears, or like I said, pennies, dimes, whatever you wanted to use. And so as I'm teaching class, talking about Columbus sailing the ocean blue in 1492, yada, 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 I noticed that Charlie Brown got out of his seat. I reach my hand in my right pocket. I'm sitting here talking, and whatever, I slip it into my left hand, put it into my left pocket, and I keep on talking. And I keep on going, talk about Madrid and this boat and that boat and the Queen and this person and that person and discovering the Americas, or not discovering this, that, and other thing. He gets out of his seat again. I take another piece, put it in my pocket, and I keep on teaching. I don't stop. I don't acknowledge him. I don't say anything. He does. I draw no attention to the behavior. And then so at the end of the class period, at the end of 45 minutes, I look in my left pocket, retrieve the items in that left pocket. However many items are in that hand, that's how many times the behavior occurred. Really easy if I'm only collecting data on one person. If you're collecting data on multiple students, you're probably going to have to revert to, a sticky note or something to be able to make a note, hopefully, again, without them realizing that you're collecting data on them. But event recording is simply a collection or a tally of how many times the behavior occurred. You can use mathematics and turn it into a rate. So say, for example, you could say that the behavior occurred at a rate of 1 time per minute, 2 times per minute, 1 time per hour, 5 times per hour, however you want to do it. And we talk about that in chapter 4 about how to calculate it and turn it into a rate. So still goes with event recording because it's still a count of how many times that behavior occurred. Latency. I had a student in one of my previous semesters that at first she was confusing duration with latency because they're both measures of time. And then she said, so latency is how late they were responding. I said, yeah, exactly. So I hadn't thought about it that way. I don't know why. I mean, it's kind of clear, latency. But anyway, so latency means I give a request and then I'm measuring the delay from the time that the request was given to the time that the behavior is initiated, not completed, but initiated. For example, if I ask my son to get out of bed in the morning to go, get ready for school, the amount of time that lapsed between me asking him to get out of bed and the time that his feet finally hit the floor, that's my measure of latency. If I have a student who I've asked all the class at the beginning of class to go ahead and get started on the morning work that's on the board and go ahead and get started while I'm taking attendance, and Charlie Brown is still up wandering around the room, digging in his backpack, needing to throw away something, having to sharpen another pencil, accidentally broke the pencil, sharpening it again, didn't like that pencil, threw that one away, getting another pencil. So that amount of time that goes between my request to start the morning assignment and the time that Charlie Brown actually initiates starting the morning assignment, that measure is latency. So anytime that you've got a student that delays initiating the behavior that you've requested, that behavior would be appropriate for latency. All right, so we talked about duration, measure of time, straightforward. Event recording, even more straightforward. Tally mark, simply a count of how many times the behavior occurred. Latency was the measure of time between request and initiation of behavior. The last page for data collection before the conclusion is, you'll notice at the heading it says partial interval, whole interval, or momentary sampling. So there's 3 different options there. Why? Because they're all related and you can choose one of the 3. You do not need to do all 3. There's 1 page. You do not need to do all 3, one of the 3. So let me explain what it means. So for my purposes, or at least at my school, our class periods are 45 minutes. So in a normal observation day or collecting data, I'd be collecting data for the whole 45 minutes. For interval recording, I'm still looking at that whole 45 minutes, but instead of looking at it as a chunk of 45 minutes, I'm breaking that 45 minutes up into smaller intervals of time. So say, for example, I'm looking at equal intervals, so I can compare apples to apples. So I can divide 45 by 9 and have 9 5-minute intervals. So instead of looking at one block of 45 minutes, I'm now looking at 9 blocks of 5 minutes. All right. So I've taken my time and I've divided it into 9 equal intervals of time. Interval recording does not allow me to easily continue to teach and collect data. Also, it is an estimation. Let me explain. So for interval recording, let's start off with whole interval. So for whole interval, we're looking to determine whether or not the behavior that we're observing, the behavior that we're looking for, did it consume the entire or the whole interval? So for example, if I'm looking at Charlie Brown being out of his seat, then I'm going to be watching Charlie Brown for that entire time. I'm going to look at my watch, set my time. I would have set my timers for 5-minute intervals. And then so it buzzes. I start watching Charlie Brown at the beginning of the first one. And I'm looking for that whole entire 5 minutes, I'm watching Charlie Brown. Is Charlie Brown out of his seat? So if Charlie Brown was out of his seat, say for example, for 4 minutes and 58 seconds, I'm about to mark yes, and then he sits down. So I'm looking for that whole 5-minute interval. So even if he was out of his seat for 4 minutes and 58 seconds, but then he sat down for the last 2 seconds, it did not consume the entire whole interval. Interval recording is recorded as a yes or a no. Yes or a no. For whole interval recording, we're looking at either yes, it consumed the whole interval, or no, it did not consume the whole interval. Hence where I said a gross estimation here. So he could have been out of his seat for 4 minutes and 58 seconds out of that 5 minutes. But because he sat down before that 5-minute totality, I mark it as no. It was not the whole interval, period. There is no explanation. There is no count. There is no measure. It's either yes or it's no. Yes or no. So since it did not consume the entire 5 minutes, that is marked as no. Now we start the next 5 minutes. And we repeat that process for all 9 of the 5-minute intervals, totaling our 45-minute class period. So I'm watching Charlie Brown that entire time. And marking each interval is either yes, the behavior consumed the entire whole interval, or no, it didn't consume the entire whole interval. The other option is partial interval recording. Still the same process. I'm watching Charlie Brown the whole entire time. I've divided the 45 minutes up into 9 5-minute intervals, and I'm watching Charlie Brown the whole entire time. And so for this time, if I'm looking again for out of seat behavior, if he got out of his seat at all during that 5 minutes, I mark it as yes. I'm not marking how many times. I'm not marking how long he was out of time. Still yes or no. So yes, he got out of his seat. I mark that one as yes. I keep watching Charlie Brown. Next interval. He didn't get out of his seat. I mark that one as no. Next interval. He got out of his seat. He actually got out of his seat 10 times. I still mark it as yes. Just once. During that interval, did it occur at all during that interval? Then yes. All right. So the other thing to understand with the interval recording, as well as momentary time sampling that I'm about to tell you about, is you're not looking at the number of times the behavior occurred. You're not looking at the amount of time. So you can't say Charlie Brown was out of his seat for 50% of the class. We don't know that. You can't say that Charlie Brown was out of his seat for 20 minutes out of the 45-minute class. You don't know that because we weren't timing it. We just recorded yes or no. Yes, the entire interval if we're doing whole, or yes, it occurred at all during the interval if we're doing partial. We report our data as intervals. So the behavior was observed in 4 out of the 9 intervals. The behavior was observed in 8 out of the 9 intervals. The behavior was observed in all 9 intervals. So you're reporting it as the number of intervals the behavior was observed, not as a percent of time, not as a total amount of time, and not as a count of occurrences, because you aren't counting those things. All right? Again, like I said, interval recording, estimation, and very difficult to teach, and then still collect data. The way that I would do this if I were using interval recording is either I would go into a colleague's class and I would observe Charlie Brown while they're teaching and I'd sit in the back of the room and keep my information, or I would have that colleague come into my classroom and collect my data for me while I'm teaching class. One of the two. I like to call momentary time sampling the cousin. It's not technically, but I like to call it the cousin. So let me explain why. So they're related in this way. I still take that same 45-minute class, for example, and I still divide it into 9 5-minute intervals. The difference, though, is that I am able to teach because of the key term there, momentary. So at the moment, so I set my Fitbit. No, I don't work for Fitbit. I don't make any money by talking about Fitbit. I just happen to love my Fitbit. Anyway, it has a silent alarm, which allows me, hopefully, unless the student's too close to me, they're not going to hear it. It vibrates on my wrist. So I can set my alarms to go off every 5 minutes. So if I'm setting my alarm to go off every 5 minutes, I'm teaching, again, talking about Columbus sailing the ocean blue in 1492. I feel a vibration on my wrist. At that moment, I look at Charlie Brown. If I'm collecting data on him being out of a seat, at that exact moment, is he in a seat or is he not in a seat? So if we're collecting on out of seat, and if he is out of his seat, I mark it as yes, and I keep on going. If I'm looking at out of seat and he's sitting down, I mark it as no, and I keep on going. It does not matter what he was doing for all of the other 4 minutes and 59 seconds out of that interval. Momentary time sampling is just that. I'm looking at that moment. So out of that 40-minute block, if I've divided it into 9 5-minute intervals, I am looking at Charlie Brown and looking at his behavior for exactly 9 seconds. 1 second, that exact moment at the end of each interval. So that allows me to be able to teach and still collect that data. However, like I said before, it is an absolute estimation, because I'm only taking into consideration, like I said, 9 seconds, because 9 moments out of a 45-minute class period. So it does not tell me about anything else. It just tells me it's a sampling, which is why momentary time sampling, it's a sampling of his behavior. And it's at that moment at the end of each interval. So I'm looking at him for only literally 9 seconds out of 45. That doesn't mean that I refuse to look at them any other time. It just means that I'm not collecting data any other time. So as I'm talking to my class, I might observe that he's out of his seat. I absolutely might observe that he's out of his seat while I'm talking. I might be over here helping Peppermint Patty, or talking to Schroeder, or talking to Linus, or attending to Woodstock, or to Snoopy. And I happen to notice that he's out of his seat. If it's not at that moment, I don't record it. I don't record it. For fidelity purposes, if I'm saying I'm using momentary time sampling as my data collection, then I'm only recording his data at the moment. So that way my data is consistent and it is done, like I said, with fidelity. That it's not just haphazard. Well, I happen to notice, because then it's arbitrary. So yes, like I said, it's absolutely an estimation, but it's a systematic estimation, not just an arbitrary, I happen to notice. It's a systematic estimation. So momentary time sampling, like I said, I call it the cousin, not a technical term, but I call it the cousin in interval recording. So for that last collection piece on your template, you have the choice of either whole interval, where you're watching Charlie Brown for the whole entire 5 minutes, 9 times, or however long your class period is. If it's an hour, then, over and over and over again, every 5 minutes for that interval. If it's partial, again, for that whole length of time, but at 5-minute intervals, did the behavior occur at all, yes or no, during that interval? Or either momentary time sampling, where you're looking at just that moment, all right? So those are the data collection types. Let's talk about the rubric. Your rubric is 2 pages long. Why? Well, like I said, I'm just slightly OCD, and I put a lot of information in things. I try to answer the questions that I anticipate that you're going to ask, and I try to make sure that it's clear exactly what it is that I'm looking for, so that way you know exactly what it is that you need to do. I don't like things that are ambiguous. I don't deal well with ambiguity. I like to know exactly what I'm looking for and exactly what's expected. So hopefully that works for you too. So your rubric, as I was saying, is 2 pages long, but you'll see that it's redundant. So it lists duration and it lists the areas that I'm looking for. And you might be looking, you say, well, Kennedy, there's 3 sections there for duration. And on the template, there's 4. So if I go back to the template, you would be correct. So on the template, I pulled the function of behavior out of the other part and included it there separately. You'll notice the points are still the same. Again, that's 15 plus 10 is 25, plus the other 10 is 35, plus that 5 is 40. So if we go to our rubric, and on our rubric, you will notice that the function of behavior is the very last line here under the data analysis and insight. I just simply pulled it out to highlight it. So that's why it says 10 points and then 5 points. Still, 15 and 15 is 30 plus 10 is 40. So it's still 40 points per section, just configured differently. So like I said, on the template, I wanted to highlight, make sure that you did not omit that function of behavior because it's key. So this information is listed here for duration, repeat it for event, repeat it for latency, and then repeat it for, and you'll see it says whole interval, partial interval, or momentary time sampling. Pay attention to the or. You're not doing all three of those. One of those three. Then you'll see that there are points for the conclusion. Like I said, what did you learn and how can you apply it? And then uploading your raw data, your Excel sheet, 10 points. And you're probably thinking, I make 4 graphs and I'm only getting 10 points for it. No, not exactly. Because when you look back at the sections, remember for each one of these, graph was mentioned in your section here. So for event recording, so you got a 10 points for just your event graph, a 10 points for your duration graph, 10 points for your latency graph, 10 points for your interval graph, and then another 10 points for uploading your Excel data. So actually out of the 200 total points, 50 of that 200 comes from Excel and your graphs. The last 20 points is your writing expectations. I know this is not a formal paper. It's not APA format by any means, but still you need to make sure that you've checked for clarity of thought, that you've concisely communicated, that you've checked your grammar, you've checked your spelling, you've checked for typos, that you've checked for all of those other things. So again, like I said, this is a major assignment, 200 points out of our total points for our course. And it's the crux of everything else. So our signature assignment is on our FBA and behavior intervention plan. Well, in the real world, you would have had to have done this before you could do that FBA. For our FBA, of course, that I'll explain in the video, we're doing a pseudo one. So it's kind of not a complete FBA BIP, and you're only doing one observation. In the real world, we would never base a behavior plan on one observation. But in an 8-week class, for learning purposes, we do. But in the real world, we would never. So in the real world, you would have done this to be able to do that. So like I said, this is 4 different data collection processes that you will be going through: duration, event, latency, and then interval recording or momentary time sampling. How do you turn in your assignment? So glad you asked that question. So on our iLearn page, content on the content page on our iLearn, you'll see data collection Dropbox. I've got an arrow pointing to it here for you. It shows you where to submit that. I've linked to that Dropbox, as you can see here in small print, the template as well as the rubric so that they're easy to find. They are also both in the folder separate from the Dropbox, and the rubric is also in the rubrics folder. So you will complete and submit all 4 sections. Remember, the first page is an example. All 4 sections for duration recording, event recording, latency recording, and then either momentary time sampling or whole interval or partial interval recording. The provided data collection project template, and end with your conclusion and reflection. The template has a page, like I said, for each of the types, each type of data collection. All descriptions and graphs should be in this one document, not submitted as separate files. Don't forget to attach the Excel spreadsheet. Files must be in Word and Excel or PDF formats. I cannot open things that are in other formats, such as things on an Apple product or a Mac. And I won't do it through Google because it has to go through our Safe Assign on iLearn. So make sure that they're uploaded in either Word and Excel or in PDF formats. The Dropbox, like all of our assignments, will disappear soon after the due date. So I hope that I've anticipated all of your questions, and I hope that this video, longer than I expected, and I apologize for the dash to go get the cord. I'll learn better and do better, make sure that I'm plugged up next time. We learn from our mistakes. So anyway, thank you guys for watching. I hope that this has answered your questions. If it did not, please do not hesitate to reach out. Either text me, email me, give me a call, and we will address any questions that I didn't anticipate. Thank you guys. I will see you in class. Take care and God bless.